CCR is one of the better ways to
Hey, hello. Welcome.
a social group. I'm sorry, what did you say? Okay.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's going to be a great night. My name is Eric Newton. This is Gould. We are the co-chairs of the Continuing Education and Training Committee. And we have other members here that are also part of the committee. If you'd like to raise your hand, let everybody know. Say your name.
Wea Mesa.
Stephanie Sexeller.
So this committee helped put this event together with questions that some of the questions that we generated, they all generated. And we're part of the Volunteer Council. And if anyone else is here from the Volunteer Council, thank you for coming and thank you for all that you do for CCR. And this night is for everybody. This night's for the volunteers, for you to ask questions, to find out, what do you struggle with? This was challenging for me. What do you do? Something like that. What's your thoughts? And we've invited 5 very distinguished panelists here who've got a lot of experience, and they're going to be able to answer some questions. And I think everyone can learn from this. I think it's a gift for everybody. And I'm going to ask each one of the members of the panel if they can just briefly share their mediation experience to the group. And then Liz will chat or share a few things.
Yep.
You start. I'm Rick Berman. I've been with CCR for 9 years. And started out like most of you do with court programs and then evolved them to Walker models, doing more than Walker models. I've done quite a number over the years. Always an adventure. And at CCR, I have also been a trainer for quite a number of years. I'm part of the mentor program from its inception, and I'm on board. So that's basically my background. I'm an attorney.
Okay. I'm Rebecca Zuber. I've been mediating here since 2000. I can only know that because I looked up there. I can never remember. I was on the design team that put together the volunteer council, so I was involved with the volunteer council, but I studiously avoided being a trainer or a mentor or anything like that because I always said I want to mediate. Well, it's where I want to spend time. And it's, I like it. It's a lot of fun. It's what I describe as one of those things that has a lifelong learning curve. So if you guys run out of questions, I have some. There are people on this panel that when I was in my first few years as a mediator, I was awed by, and I'm still awed by them. They know who they are. So I was really surprised when they invited me on this side of this discussion.
We're not surprised. I'm Mark Bergner. I was pretty much just going to say ditto Rick because I'm almost the same background. I started mediating here in 2001, and I've moved over mostly to training now, and I'll be mentoring in the program.
I'm Michael Nathanson, and I've been mediating and training here for almost 30 years. And outside of here, I do arbitrations and mediations.
I'm Cookie Levitz, and I've been a volunteer since 1978. And I've probably forgotten everything you're all learning at this point in time. And I'm here because CCR is a great organization.
Well, it's really great to have our panelists. A broad range of experience. I think it's going to be a great night. This is being filmed in case you haven't caught on. It's right back there. And once it's posted to YouTube, we'll send out a link. And wanted to talk about how this is not the end of the conversation, just the beginning. We've thought about ways in which to use the questions as part of social media to get, the conversation still going. And we've talked about a part 2 to this that Michael will lead. That's called a circle process. If you want to talk about that just a bit about what that is.
It's just where there's a group of people sitting around, and one person runs it. And basically, just ensures that people can talk as long as they want, typically, although we make them here. And there's a talking piece and it's passed around, and if you hold it, then you talk, and when you're done, you pass it. And the general idea is usually everyone's getting consensus on something, but it can be aimed in a variety of directions.
That sounds great. So we're going to use some of the things that we have tonight that are kind of juicier, or could benefit by being delved in a bit deeper, and we'll bring that to part 2. So at this point, why don't we start? And I will start with a question. We've gotten a few from our committee just to get us started tonight, but then we'll kick it back to you all. What should you do as a mediator if a party informs you during the mediation that he or she has no intention to settle the case or the issue? I'll leave this to you.
You should appoint somebody to start.
Mark.
No good deed goes unpunished.
You're right. All right, well, I guess part of the question would be if it came up during the crosstalk or the caucus. I guess that would be, depending on where it came up. But
You're gonna have to speak up, I can hardly hear you.
I'm sorry. So I think I would make the presumption that they don't really know whether they intend to settle or not, because they don't really know what the other side might have to offer. I might throw out something facetious if they said something like that. Oh, if the other side offered you $1 million tonight, you would refuse to settle? And they would probably say, no, well, I would settle, of course, for $1 million. And then you've got a basis to work from. So I guess, I would just kind of reality test the intention to settle. And if they remain firm in saying that they really didn't want to settle, I guess I would ask them if they were comfortable, if they thought there was any benefit to mediating. And probably if it was in a caucus that they said that and they remained firm, I think I would probably say that, this is something we should probably bring up to the other party, because if there's no benefit to mediating, then why waste everyone's time?
Rebecca, would you like to respond?
Sure. I mean, I think your point about it depending on where it falls in the process is a really good one. Because if it happens very early on, I mean, people often posture that way. And you sort of use the process to move them into. So if somebody's really adamant about it, and it's early on and it's in crosstalk, then I probably go to caucus and investigate that more. Especially if they won't communicate about anything else. But if they just sort of throw it out there, and it's not something that they're really insisting on. I mean, you can get overreacting to things that people just throw out, because they'll do that. They want to see what your reaction is and what the other party says. So, sometimes you can ignore it.
Posturing position.
Right.
I think the difficulty is sometimes when their attorney has told them not to negotiate at all. And so it puts you in a position that you don't want to have them do something their attorney doesn't want them to do. On the other hand, it's basically what Mark and Rebecca said, that, I would ask them, what their concerns are about settling now. And, go do the reality testing of going over what are the pros and cons of settling. And what do they feel they would have to lose if they did settle at this point. And I might also ask if it was even though at CCR there's no mandatory mediation, I mean, judges refer people, they don't have to participate. But I would ask again, what was the judge's expectation, or why did the judge think that this might be a good environment for you to talk about the issues? And I think it's sometimes that people feel, well, I don't want to give them my case now. Well, it's like, you're going to give them your case at some point in time. So what's the problem with now versus later? What do they think, again, what do they think that they would lose? But ultimately, if somebody doesn't want to, I mean, we don't.
Well, I had something similar. I wrote down some things, asking them why they are there, and whether it was their advantage to leave anyway, and whether they want to want to get beside them. And they should leave now. And ask them
I'm
if
sorry,
it's
I can't.
possible.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll talk louder. And following up, but you said ask them whether or not they might buy in later, and also whether they've done it before and how it worked out.
Any thoughts, Rick?
You know, I've often experienced it the opposite way, where one party says, well, I'd be willing to negotiate, but the other side's unreasonable, they don't want to settle. And that's a great opportunity to just continue the discussion to get to needs and interests. What is it about the party that makes you feel that way? What happened to you with this party that makes you feel that you can't negotiate with this party? And I think you just have to do more of the needs and interests work. Until you've done the needs and interests work, it's a meaningless statement to say, you know, I won't settle or the other party won't settle. They're discouraged. They walk in discouraged, and that's pretty typical.
That's great. Should we do one more?
If I could just say, but
Yeah.
you do get cases sometimes where somebody walks in and it's clear, even though they don't say it, that that's their intent. So the lawyer is taking almost a complete record of what's going on. And it's pretty clear that the person who is running the company, let's say that kind of mediation, is really not interested in settling. It didn't, and purposely came with the idea of just talking about it and not settling. But I think the same principles we've all talked about still apply. They still might buy in. You can still try and get what's an interest. So,
But I think it's very easy to assume that if you can't get them engaged, that it's one, a useless waste of everybody's time, and two, that it's, you know, your job to sort of push them into being engaged in this process. Because it's not, and it doesn't work to push them. I mean, you can, you know, try everything you can think of to try to lead them into it. But the result that comes out of a situation where people feel like they're forced to negotiate and they end up settling on something that they're not comfortable with is not very useful. Generally, it doesn't hold up well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is to new people, it's okay. I mean, you should work on your, sort of your bag of tricks and the skills that you have to try and engage them and to get them into the process. But if it doesn't work out, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
I was gonna say, I would guess about maybe 2% of my mediations, I think, did not advance the parties at all. The other 98% obviously don't all settle, but I at least feel that, you know, they've moved. They're in a different spot at the end of the mediation than they were when they started. So, you know, I have no qualms at all about doing a mediation that I don't think has got a great chance of settling, just because I know at the end of the day the parties will probably be further along than they were.
Yeah, because even if they don't want to, they hear things that, you know, resonate with them later.
So if you come to a mediation where it's clear that one party came for purposes of informal discovery, basically, right, to ask a bunch of questions, they have no intention of settling, their party is represented clearly, their lawyers, they're taking copious notes and doing what lawyers do, and the other side is not represented. Is there any obligation or kind of duty on the part of the mediator to do anything about that situation? I guess I can imagine that kind of working a long-term disadvantage to the party who's not represented, because they may be talking or saying things, and while you can't use what's said in mediation in court, it certainly is information, right, that the lawyer is going to use later to their client's advantage, for sure.
I think it all comes back to what Rick said, which is you just work on the needs and interests and forget about everything else. I mean, it's because you don't know, they may change their mind.
Although I think in your scenario, if I started to feel really uncomfortable that they really weren't, that I really felt that they really weren't talking in order to move things forward, and it really was just taking notes, then I would probably caucus and check in with both sides about that. And I think just personally, I might do shuttle if I really felt that, if the person who was unrepresented didn't understand what was going on.
How often has that ever happened to you? Where you felt that really the sole reason was just to do discovery.
I can't even remember a time.
Yeah, I think, you know, it could happen, but I think you're talking about something that's extremely unusual, and that there might be a question, you know, what are you hoping to get out of this for both parties? What harm, what benefits do you think you get out of it, or what harm do you think could be by having this process proceeding like that? So at least you get them thinking about it, if you think that's a legitimate concern.
I'd be very careful about just making that judgment to begin with, because what if you presume that was true and it really wasn't? I mean, you could destroy an otherwise meaningful mediation, make that presumption and act on it, so I would be very careful about presuming.
It kind of reminds me of a discussion that I heard these two have a long time ago about, because I think what you're talking about is when you perceive that there's a significant sort of power imbalance that's going on in the room that you're in. And Cookie and Michael had a very interesting conversation about power imbalances and how they work and what you do with them in mediation, and whether it's the mediator's responsibility to try and address a power imbalance or not. And I think I think the real answer to it is what Rick says, which is, you know, that your job really is to try to go to needs and interests, and if you can help people examine those as well as show them, then the opportunity for a power imbalance to work itself out in the room is greater. But I sort of came around to Michael's argument, at least as I remember it, which was that it's not really your job to take care of that as the mediator. And that's hard for me because I'm a social worker by training. But you know, it's the way it is.
But I think, if I could quote Michael, and he will definitely correct me if I'm wrong, is that you would also say that even though we can't balance the power, we can make people aware of it, or have transparency that, you know, there is this going on, are you okay with it? And sort of put it out on the table. And then it's up to the parties to decide what they're comfortable doing. Did I quote you correctly?
Yeah, I think it's our responsibility. I think when there's a power imbalance, we have a responsibility to deal with it. But I don't think we have a responsibility to balance it. I think that's a really piece of misinformation. I think our responsibility is to point it out and say, am I observing this correctly? You've got a lot of power and you don't, is that right? And if that's the case, what do you want to do about that? I think that's our job, really. Because it is true in a lot of mediations we do, there is a big difference in power, and that happens, you know, in business. It happens all the time. People negotiate from those different power positions.
I often think of my job as the mediator as being sort of the person who points out in the most politic way possible that the emperor has no clothes. You know, it's like you can voice the things that are lying there in the room unspoken in a way, so long as you do it neutrally and you know, do it in a hopefully nonpartisan way. And most often, if you frame it in a question, in the form of a question, you know, that's, I think, one of the real advantages to mediation as a way to resolve conflicts, is that there's somebody else in the room who can pick up on what's going on and lay it out there in a way that makes it possible for the opposing parties to approach it, where they can't do it themselves.
You talking about the elephant in the room?
Yeah, yeah.
Does anybody else have another question based on, or any other questions you had at 6 o'clock?
No questions.
So I will ask another one. What should you do as a mediator when the parties are at an impasse? So that's when maybe neither party or one party is not willing to budge in their position. What do you do? Do you want to start?
I don't do this all the time, and it really has to apply to the situation, but sometimes I do a lot of family, cases and cases with a lot of emotional content. And so sometimes I just do something unexpected. And I might just say, okay, we're just taking a break at the table, I don't separate them. But I might give them sort of like a writing assignment, you know, what's your worst fear about this settling? Or what's your worst fear if X happens? And just let each of them sort of take the time to think so that the antagonism isn't so much directed at one another. It's almost like a break, but they have to stop and think about what's going on for them at that point. And sometimes, again, this is not just a CCR mediation, but the family mediation I've done. In one case, I asked them, you know, what are your goals for your children? What do you want for your children? And they had been arguing back and forth nonstop. They wrote the exact 5 same things that they wanted for the kids. And I was able to read, you know, because I collected the papers and then read it out. And it was, you know, sort of like, okay, we're not as far apart as we thought, because all the emotional stuff was getting there. So just doing something totally different, unexpected, something to sort of shake it up.
Okay, I do have a question to follow up with that. So you read those responses out to the parties,
Mhm.
so they can, oh, that's cool.
And I was, you know, and my own reaction was like, you know, you're not gonna believe this, you wrote the exact 5 things and I read them.
Did you find that it brought them back to what really was
I think,
important?
I mean, they were still antagonistic, but I think it got them seeing that they had the same goals. They really wanted the same things for the kids, and it was really, you know, even though they were far apart emotionally, that they weren't far apart in terms of their kids.
Mark?
I guess a lot of times when I run into this situation, which is really, really rare, almost never happens. Usually, one of the parties feels that they're morally right about their position, that they have, you know, they've been as honest as they could, or they felt that they were doing the right thing. And, you know, talking it over and, you know, maybe having them consider the possibility that, you know, they can still be absolutely right about their position and still compromise. It's not necessarily about admitting that they were wrong about something. So.
Am I the only non-lawyer? You're not a lawyer. Yeah. I think, actually, I had a really bad mediation here just last week or the week before, where basically I had, for the first time ever, a party refuse to mediate with me. And I've thought about it a lot. And I know that this guy would have been a difficult party under any circumstances. But one of the things that I realized was that I've been doing this is a long way around of making a point, that I've been doing this for a long time, and I've gotten sometimes a little overconfident, you know, because I'm a pretty engaging person, and I can almost always sort of engage the parties fairly early on. And so I had sort of dropped some of the pieces of the process, or had tried to, you know, hurry them along. So what I want to say about this is that often, I like Cookie's notion about doing something that's unexpected, but the other thing that I would say is to work the process. That the process is set up in such a way that it does things at the right time. And again, when you encounter these kinds of issues at different points in the mediation, it makes a difference what you're gonna do. If this is what you encounter at the beginning, you still have a whole lot of process to go through to move them past the impasse. If this happens after 3.5 hours of negotiating, then you have a different sort of problem to try and solve. But relying on, when you feel like, you know, everything is stuck, sort of reviewing in your mind and relying again on the process and what steps it's giving you to do at any given point in time, I think can really help you regain sort of your sense of composure and what needs to be done next. And that is always to the good of the parties being able to move forward. So, and I've been doing this for however many years, so, you know, you can blow it up any old time. Lifelong learning.
You know, I think the questions easier to answer in context, depends what's the impasse about. Mark's talking about one kind of impasse, you're talking about where in the process. But if you talk about specifics, you use different techniques, I think, for different specifics. And one that I would give as an example is parties are arguing over money. And at least that's the position of the parties. And one party said, this happens a lot, and I assume most of you dealt with this. You're in two caucuses, and the party says, I'm willing to offer this, but the other party has to go first. I will do that, but I want to hear what they're doing first, because otherwise I'm negotiating against myself. And, what you can do for that is say, what if the other party takes the same position? Then neither of you are offering, and you want to offer something. What's the benefit, what's the harm in you going first? Does that mean that you have to negotiate against yourself? Could you stop at this point if you want to offer? So you do some what-ifs in a context like that. Another example with money is one party does put out an offer on the table, and the other party just says no. And then the first party is very frustrated, thinking, well, I'm trying to negotiate, and the other party isn't negotiating with me. And then probably you have a lot of reality testing, needs and interest work on the other party. Why are you saying no? What other alternatives are there? Do you want to reach a settlement? Are you interested in, this party's offering something? Do you think there is some middle ground that may work for you? So it really does depend, I think, on the context that the impasse, both where it is in the process and the context of what type of issue it is, what strategy you use.
I guess from my standpoint, I really don't recognize that impasse is happening unless people are really getting up and walking out. So if people are still sitting there and talking, and they have all these disagreements, I guess it doesn't occur to me that they're at impasse. But if the lawyers actually pack up their briefcases and make for the door, then I know that that's what I think is a good impasse. And for that kind of thing, I think it partly depends on what I think people consider what the edges of the CCR model are. So, for example, what a lot of CCR mediators will do on money issues is to basically say, why don't we sit down for a minute, you agreed on everything else except the money, and then to make the proposal of, I'll come up with a number that's not court or reasonable or fair, but something that it sounds based on what you all talked about might work for you. So that for a money issue, and it's a question of whether you're reframing something or whether you're giving advice. I know a lot of CCR mediators have done this. I don't know, what you think about whether or not that's okay, but it's clearly at the edge of the model. So there's a question about whether you want to do that or not. The other thing you can do if it's not a money issue but something else, you can do essentially is the same approach, which is to say, I've heard you talk, and then comes it's a reframing, but it's really a piece of advice in a sense. You say, but it sounds like the two of you are really saying that you would like to do the following, and would you like to sit down and try to talk about that and see if that will work for you. So there's those two, I think those are those two approaches depending upon whether it's money or something else. But I don't know whether that's an acceptable part of the model. I know that CCR mediators do it.
Make suggestions in the way that you just...
The way I described.
Yeah. No.
When people are stuck on money, one of the things that I like to ask them is, okay, this is where you're at on money. Let's say you're $1,000 apart. You don't feel like giving in. You're fairly sure the other party's not going to give in. Is there anything else that you can think of that you could throw into this negotiation, that you could offer, that's not money, that you feel like might move this along? So, so I try to get them off. It's it's sort of similar to your thing, to throw in something completely different. Because usually they're so, wrapped up in the notion of dollars and cents that often if you ask them to step back and think about what they say, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, I don't know. And then you sort of review some of the things that they've talked about. You have this relationship. You're going to live next door to each other for the next 15 years. Whatever it is, they're, you know, and you sort of get them thinking about something else in a little more creative kind of way. And then sometimes that's so hard that they find settling on money to be a lot easier. And sometimes, you know, they actually come up with something that's meaningful to them that the other person can give them. Often it's an apology, but not always.
Hey, Barb?
I think there's a,
I think Barb has a question.
Oh, no, well, this isn't a question, I was gonna make it unsolicited for a minute. The things that we're talking about just kind of triggered in my head, the fact that when you get stuck on money, I mean, you can get stuck on anything, but when you get stuck on money, the emotional component is that the money is representing something akin to I'm wrong and you're right, or I'm right and you're wrong. And so if you can somehow or other remove that right and wrong from the equation, that then the money is not, because it means different things to them anyway, and you kind of, if you could point that out in an appropriate fashion, but it's not the dollar so much, it's what it's representing to them, and you can get that out of there somehow.
Well, and sometimes the easiest way is just to say, what does this money mean to you? You know, I mean, I know it's money, but what else does it mean to you?
But then they can't say, well, it means that he's right and I'm wrong, and that, you know, it was my fault and it's not my fault. And then, so now you know that this is what they're dealing with, and you've got to try and examine whether or not this money can actually represent two different things to two different people, which it really does anyway, usually.
I sometimes approach it through the aggravation factor, I call it. I had somebody once say to me, appeal to their narcissism. And so basically, you know, the idea of, you know, if they've come pretty far and they're just left, it's sort of like, you know, what's it worth to you just to get it over with? You know, you want to deal with this person again, you know, what's it been like in your life to have to think about this, and deal with it day after day, and how much more time will it take up? And sort of just appealing to, you know, what positive benefits are there to them to just sort of like, okay, it's done. I don't have to think about it anymore. I just call it
Or
the sort of
negative.
aggravation.
Or the other way around, guys, positive benefits, but the negative, how much is it gonna cost you if you don't reach an agreement today going forward? Is it worth the cost benefit of that?
and I think this idea of trying to get them to talk about what the value is one way to think about it. But there's another way to think about it that I think, well, at least I frequently make a mistake in doing, which is to do the reverse and have them monetize the stuff. So somebody says, well, they're trying to poison my dog. Well, how much is it worth it to you to let them poison your dog? I mean, tell me how many dollars that is, because it concretizes things for people. And so if somebody's at impasse, and let me put it this way, if somebody has actually gotten to impasse and they're walking out, and at that point, if I can think, well, wait a minute, there's some stuff that didn't get monetized. I've made a mistake already, because I should have done that before. And I think in a lot of negotiations and in a lot of mediations, we neglect to ask people to monetize stuff. Because it's not so much that they can actually put a correct number on it. That's not the issue at all. It's that in a lot of negotiations, people put numbers on things to sort of get them into a space, and it satisfies them so they can negotiate on stuff. That frequently happens in very large-scale negotiations. It isn't, and everybody recognizes it isn't the truth. So you don't need the right number.
That's great. Any other questions from the group?
Yeah, and Rebecca said something about she had a bad mediation the other day. Anybody else ever have a bad mediation?
But I was curious as to why it was a bad mediation.
Well, one of the parties got offended at something I said and refused to mediate.
At the beginning or
Yes.
in the middle? Or
Yeah, no, they were still doing opening statements. It was a fee case. The lawyer came in, he was really not interested in being here, which is, I've done a million of those.
Right.
That's happened before. And he used something that I said to get out of it. And what he did was to say, because the other party said a few things about what had happened during the course of the case, and see what I think I did wrong was I asked too many questions during the opening statement. So I should have just let it lie and then come back to it during crosstalk. But instead, I asked a few questions about it, and so the lawyer essentially said, you're trying to get this guy to file an ARDC claim against me, and I'm not gonna mediate. And he was just looking for a way out, but I gave it to him, unfortunately, you know? But if I had followed the process a little bit more cleanly, he wouldn't have had that opportunity, at least not at that point. And then I would have had more of an opportunity to engage him. It was just a mistake. You know, it was a mistake that, which is one reason why I think we need to do peer review for people forever, because I haven't had a peer review in many years. And you know, we all need to get cleaned up a little bit now and again in our use of the process. I think it's good to, you know, have somebody come in and say, yeah, you know, you're good at this, but here's an area where you can tighten it up, or here's a place where you've gotten a little sloppy. But I was gonna say in Cookie's point about, I've actually asked client parties, and I do it frequently, do you like this guy? But, you know, the other person, if it's somebody that they're not going to have an ongoing relationship with, no. What are you willing to pay to never have to see them again?
That's
You know,
exactly
if you don't settle here today, you're gonna have to see them again in court, or you're gonna have to do that. What's it worth to you never to have to deal with them again? You know, you can't ask that question if you haven't established some rapport, but if you have, you know, and that really gets people thinking about it. You know, and it's true.
And that's the kind of thing that you would not expect to come out of the mouth of the neutral.
Yeah.
Do you like this guy?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not a
mixing it up.
non-neutral thing to say. I mean, it's about them, it's not about you. You're not saying you don't like the guy. But, you know, the question is, do you like him? Is this somebody you ever really want to have to see again? And if you don't, fix it now.
I'm thinking $29.95 a day is about the right rate for this guy.
Did that answer your
Well,
question?
yeah, I mean, I'm curious, were they there voluntarily, were they paying, or were they, was the court appointed? I don't think it doesn't sound like you made a mistake, but who knows?
Oh, I think I did, but that's okay. It was a physician, I'm sorry, I work in the healthcare industry. It was a divorce attorney fee case that was sent here by the court.
Okay, so, I mean, obviously you wanted to get out of it. Can't
Was
blame
he
you,
the
but-
attorney?
He was
Was
the
he-
attorney, he was the initiator, he was the one who was suing, and you know, basically what he said was, we don't have to spend any more time on this, but basically what he said was, the guy owes me $14,000 and I'm willing to talk about a payment schedule. In fact, he told me exactly how much the guy owed him to the penny,
Right.
and he said, and I'm not willing to negotiate the amount.
They just seemed afraid that there was gonna be an ARDC claim.
Well,
mean,
I did
so
notice
maybe-
that.
Maybe he did have a reason to stay.
Or maybe he had a reason not to be there. I mean, I think he blew it up because he didn't want to discuss it with the guy.
Okay, so, thank you. Does anybody else have a question, though, on a challenging mediation?
I had a challenging mediation the other day here at CCR, and where I felt like it was my first fee case. Maybe they sensed my fear, and
Yeah.
so I guess maybe that's why. Well, so it was like the attorney, right, the law firm who was the initiator, and then the other person, the respondent, was an attorney as well. And his position was like, who are you? You're nobody. Attitude to me. And so how do you remain neutral and not be angry at this person by being very condescending? He was very condescending. He was very arrogant and cocky, and I can say all that, right? And he was like, you don't know anything, and they're unethical. And that's the bottom line. And why would I talk to you, or why would I even be here? You're not a decision maker. So, you know, what are you gonna do for me? Nothing. You know, so it was really hard for me to keep my neutrality, and I tried to bring it back to the whole thing. But I found it really hard because I was like, well, how do you deal? Well, my question is, how do you deal with that?
Well, one way to do it is to agree with him, because in fact, you may not be able to help him, but also to point out just the program, and that the program has been going on for a while, and it has helped a number of people in his position. And, you know, asked him whether that's meaningful to him or not, or thinks that that might be, useful just based on that. But I think you have to recognize that he could be right, and tell him that he's right.
I did, I am not an attorney, you're right, I am not a decision maker, you're right, that's what I would tell him.
But what you do offer is what the whole program is offered.
Right.
Many people in that program, many lawyers situated as he is, have been helped.
What I said was, you are right, correct, I am not an attorney. You are correct, I am not a decision maker. However, I'm here to help you facilitate a conversation with this person, because this is what we do here.
And the fact that you're not a decision maker is actually one of the reasons that judges send people here for this. That's why we have the program, so that someone, if they want a decision maker, you can always go back to court. That they're find a decision maker.
Can I add something? It sounded like in your question, a part of what you were asking was, how do I, as the neutral party here, maintain my composure? And I think that's a different question than the one we just answered. And what I loved, I have, just as a background, I haven't seen many of you. I was trained 2 years ago, and I haven't been involved at all. So now I'm coming back because I've missed that experience so much. And what I loved about my training was feeling like, I loved feeling unimportant. Like, it didn't matter what kind of personality I had. I was totally taken out of the equation, and I just had to follow these steps. Like, that's all I had to do. So I found that to be helpful, and I was wondering if you could speak to that as well.
So is that, your question is based on what Claudia said about
Right.
the neutrality piece? How do
Right.
you deal if your neutrality is
And
off?
if that is something that has come up to you, because we all have egos, we all have, you
But I
know.
don't
You know-
think, for me, I'm sorry, quickly, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, no.
My question is more like, I kept my neutrality, obviously, I did my job because that's what I come for. But my question was like, how do I felt like I lost control of the situation when he would say that. How would you like bring it back to like, it's okay, this is gonna work, try to give it a chance. But he wouldn't, even in caucus, he would like, I validated him as much as I could. I was trying to bring him to a soft place, but he wouldn't want to come. And every time he felt like I brought him to a soft place, he would close down, like he would shut down, he would put his guard. And that's the challenging part. Like, I was like,
So Claudia, you're saying if you lose control, how do you get control
yeah,
back?
how do you get
And then we can follow up later with Stephanie's question about if you lose neutrality, how do you deal with that? So
Thanks, Eric.
can you address Claudia's first about losing control and how do you bring control back?
But did you lose control or did you feel like you lost control?
I felt like I wasn't bringing him, like he kept shutting down. Like I felt like I brought him to like a soft little mushy place where he can like tell me his whole life story. And then he would be, when he felt that, he would close off. And he'll become like this arrogant person again. And I'll be like, okay. So I didn't care that he was cocky, I didn't care that he was condescending. I only cared about the process. I wanted to make sure, Ray always tells me, you're married to the process, you're committed to the process. Every time I come, she always tells me that. And I said, well, this is the only time I'm ever gonna commit to anything, tell you, okay, I'm gonna do this,
But you may have been, I don't know, I mean, none of us were there, but you may have been doing the best anybody could have done in the circumstance. And it just felt frustrating because there wasn't any movement.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that you,
Because
Like, I didn't know if I was doing the right thing, like, did I, like, I mean, I don't know.
the only thing that I can think of, and it is hard to pull it off, I think you're good at pulling this off, but it is to sort of, to maybe say what you're seeing, exactly, that it sounds like, every time we sort of get close to this, am I right, it seems like this becomes very uncomfortable to you, or something, just sort of just lay out what you're seeing to them. But it sounds like you did all the things you're supposed to do.
could I just say something which I have no idea whether it applies or not, but I'll tell you an experience I had a long time ago at CCR, which was I used to go around and observe people to try and learn. And when I did that, there seemed to be a division between different types of people in whether or not they felt comfortable or in control. So people who had recently been trained and were young or female, you know, when we got done and we would debrief about everything, there's tended, I'm not sure this is entirely correct, but this is my feeling, that there tended to be a feeling on the part of young people or women that somehow they hadn't done it right or they weren't in control or something like that. And so, I don't know whether that's still true or not. If I went around and I don't know if I'd have the same experience, but I would just say that, again, you may have done everything right and simply because it was the first fee case you did, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you feel pretty insecure about that, even though you're doing all the right things. My guess is that because we do just the process, and you were doing that you were probably doing everything correctly.
A lot of times in the fee cases, you have a lawyer there, not all the time, but a lot of times you have a lawyer. If they don't have a lawyer as mediator, you're less, because you don't understand how the court system works, you don't understand
Yeah, that's
family law.
realistic.
So yes, you get that, and you have to say, you know, have you been through mediation before? You know, I know the process, I may not know the law, but I'm not here to give you legal advice. You're the lawyer, you know what the legal advice is. A question you could get beyond it with a lot of rapport, and it sounds like you really did try to do it, and sometimes it started to work, and then it went back on you for whatever reason. One of the questions that I like to ask always in a fee case, and I don't know if you asked this or not, is I always ask the attorney who's bringing the matter, how do you feel about your practice? What do you think about your practice? And you get really different answers from, I love what I'm doing, I help people, to, I hate doing matrimonial work, but I've been doing it for 25 years and I'm stuck. There's nothing else I'm going to make a living at. And then there's a whole bunch of follow-up questions. And just by showing that interest, in a lot of cases, you'll build up rapport, which will compensate for his prejudice that you're not an attorney. That'll help. Some people are just not going to give you that credence as a mediator. The other question you might ask, and I don't know if you asked this either, is have you been through mediation before? What was your experience in mediation? I mean, if he's done a bunch of these fee cases and it's not worked out for him, he does have a prejudice against it. If he hasn't done a mediation
He was the
before-
respondent,
Oh, he was the respondent.
and he was an attorney.
Had he been through other mediations? Did you ask
I'm
him? Okay, that's a good question to ask, you know, what's your experience with mediation? If they haven't had it, then I think it's perfectly fine for you to say, we've been doing this for lots and lots of years here, and we find, we can't guarantee it, it doesn't always work out, but in a lot of cases it does. We just bear with us, and, you know, are you okay with staying with the process and doing the work? You know, just be that direct.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say, I think you can be pretty direct in that situation too. You can say something like, I don't know the exact language, it would be the circumstance, but it'd be in essence, you know, look, you're right, I'm not a lawyer, and you're right, I don't know anything about what's going on in terms of the law at all, totally clueless. You can go back to the judge, which is one possibility. On the other hand, I'm the magician that may be able to get you what you want. You want to talk about what you want, because that's why I'm here, to try and satisfy that. And so let's focus on that and see whether or not this process, as executed by me, can help you or not. If you don't feel you want to try it, that's fine. But really this idea that you're the magician that he has to use to get his needs met or end up in court. And I think you can be pretty blunt about that.
I think it's very hard, especially when you're new, I mean, it still happens to me sometimes, especially if I haven't mediated for a while, and I feel like, you know, I don't have my bag of tricks completely under my arm like it's supposed to be. I think it's really hard not to get rattled in a situation where you're dealing with a lot of hostility like that. And especially, I mean, let's face it, attorneys can be extremely arrogant, not these guys. But, you know, so can doctors and, you know, a number of other people who have positions in our society that are considered, you know, to be high status.
Like mediators.
Like, yeah. So I think it's, you know, sometimes it's taking a deep breath, sometimes it's just completely switching out what you're talking about to, like Rick said, you know, to start to build rapport. Sometimes you ask a question that's on target to do that, sometimes you just ask a question that's completely not related, you know, and you can say, let's take a break from this topic for a minute, let's talk about why. tell me a little bit about this, that, or the other thing. And, then they'll scream at you about the fact that they could be billing $350 an hour if they were in their office, but they're not in their office, they're with you, so.
I was there for that one.
Yeah, we had that experience. And, it can happen. Well, you saw what that guy was like, he wasn't easy. And I didn't handle it perfectly, but that's okay.
So does that help you, Claudia?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I remembered reading a story one time about a concentration camp survivor who, was suffering with some kind of a great pain, and he discovered that if he pictured himself while he was suffering in the pain, standing on a podium and describing his pain to others, that for some magic reason, it made the pain disappear. And so I would say in a mediation, if some guy is belittling you, berating you, trying to make you feel less about it, you're just there objectively saying, oh, so you feel that, blah, blah, blah. You don't take it personal, don't, buy into what he's saying. Maybe don't try to get defensive, but, oh, so your view is that, this isn't gonna work so well because I don't understand, and, just take that kind of an attitude towards it. And, that's all it is he's just sitting there flapping his jaws, and you're executing a process. And
Just to follow up on that, I know that once I had a case where I really felt like I was losing neutrality because the one party was so incredibly angry, but expressing it in an incredibly obnoxious way. And the thing that I've learned working with a lot of social workers and mental health professionals is that exactly what you said, it's really not about you. It's about what kind of pain are they going through, and you just happen to be the person that's, getting that sort of dumped on you, which is also serving a purpose in a way, although that's a hard purpose to serve, is that it really is more about what kind of pain and really what's going on for them in that point. But I'm not saying that's easy, because it's hard to not feel sort of dumped on, but if you can say, look, they don't know me, it's really not about me.
Right.
It's really about where they are right now.
And he was like, when I did caucus with him, I really saw that he was in pain, but he was trying so hard not to show his pain. And every time I brought him into where he wanted to talk about his pain, he wouldn't do it. And I understand. Who wants to talk about pain with someone, And he was trying very hard to stay strong, and it was very hard, and it was sad, really sad that he was going through all that pain. He was going to lose his daughter. He lost already money. This would be his third attorney he was getting. And it was just very hard. He was being accused of other stuff. So I validated those points, but he was like, yeah, I don't need you to validate me. But
you know what you did may resonate with him at a later point, even though that didn't work. That it was like, well, somebody actually listened to me. So that could be very powerful. You won't know about it, but it could be very powerful.
I don't know that we addressed or answered your question.
I feel like some of my question was wrapped up in that. I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add, but I feel good.
It's hard, because there are times. There are, parties that come in that have characteristics that push buttons that you have. And that happens, other people may not admit it, but I think it happens to all of us. And you do, and that's another time when I think that you really hold tight to the process. And, think about what you're there to do. And you don't have to like every party. In fact, you probably won't like a lot of it.
I think though, when you say that you like not being important in the room, I don't know that that's really correct, because most often the parties see you as all powerful, no matter how many times you give your speech saying, I'm not a judge, I'm not an arbitrator, I'm not deciding anything, I'm just here to facilitate, help you have a dialogue. They so much want you on your side throughout the whole process. Almost every case, it's crucial for them to think that you're on their side, and you just have to deal with that. So you are a very important person, not just for the skills that you bring in, but the perception that the parties have of you, and you have to watch always for the, not just being neutral, but the perception is either party seeing you as more sympathetic to one party than the other. And that can happen with you being totally neutral, and you have to always be on your guard to avoid that perception, or if they have that perception, fix it real quick.
But I think I understand in part what you mean, because I feel the same way. We're not, it's not by, in a certain sense, it's not by virtue of our skill that we're helping anybody. It's by virtue of us being a person who's executing the process. And so, I mean, in that sense, I think we are unimportant, because we're just the vessel through which it happens.
I think what I meant was that my feelings aren't important. It doesn't matter. It's just not about me. I loved going through the training and feeling like less significant. I mean, I'm 27. I barely just got out of my parents' house. I'm like the most important thing in anyone's life, myself included. So it was so nice to be like, nobody gives a shit about me. This is great. I don't need to care about me. Let's all forget about me.
Well, one of the things that I always say in my opening statement is that one of the reasons that I do this is because I don't have to make any decisions.
Yeah,
It's
right.
the only place in my life where I don't have to make any decisions, is when I'm in that room.
Oh, that's
And, they look at you kind of like, really? But, it's true. And I do it, mostly to give them a little bit of a giggle, because I like to do little icebreakers in the beginning, but.
Any questions from you all? Anything else that's burning? Yeah.
How do you maintain neutrality if one party is so obnoxious and you have a strong dislike of that party? Even if you try to maintain neutrality, but sometimes it shows.
It's hard. I mean, I think it's sort of what I said before, is realizing that something really emotionally difficult is going on for them. But I think it is essential to find some humanity in the, people you're dealing with, so you can feel some compassion for them. And it may take going to caucus and just chatting with them a little bit to get to see, how they are talking about something that's maybe a little bit aside from what the dispute is. Maybe Michael's always good at what do you do for a living, or, maybe getting some conversation. Because you have to somehow connect to something that is human about them, that you can feel something, because it's hard when they're really obnoxious.
Cookie, could you tell your story to him about when you were meeting with your boss, a very difficult party to you?
Well, that was what I told you.
Barb has a question over there.
No, I was just gonna say, that I try to tell myself that the more obnoxious somebody is, it's just reflecting the more pain that they're in.
Exactly.
And so that it's not me at all, and this is the humanity that and whether or not it's really true is what I tell myself.
Exactly.
So, and it helps me get right through it, because then I'm just looking at them as a person in need of help.
May I?
Go for it.
Response to Claudian. What's your first name, sir?
Joseph.
Joseph. It's not that you cannot. It's not that you will don't want to maintain neutrality. It's very difficult to do it. So the most critical element of that is, I'll use technical terms, to be mindful, to be aware of your own hot buttons. Who said hot buttons? To be aware of your own hot buttons and acknowledge that they've been pushed.
Not necessarily out loud.
No, typically not, but sometimes.
Sometimes. That's right.
Acknowledge that. When you acknowledge that, you become aware of it. When you are aware of it, if you have coping mechanisms, then you employ them. One of those is to fall back on the skill set or the process, whatever it is. Two, also directly to you, but it's applicable, listening to what Michael said, what Cookie said, what Rebecca said, Rick said. To quote Michael, I think it was Michael, yeah, comfortable and in control. That's what you were saying to Claudia. I think you have to apply that to the parties and understand that the more difficult they are, the less comfortable they are, and the more they feel out of control. And it might be useful if that becomes obvious to acknowledge that by saying this is difficult. The third thing is going to more empathy. To Claudia's case, this was a lawyer. He was on his third lawyer. He was a respondent.
Yes.
He had a lot more baggage he was carrying with him, and it might have been useful to help him both in terms of reality. How has this worked from a practical point of view? And the other part of them is to acknowledge, and maybe you were doing this, that you were hearing from his extreme frustration and sadness, not being able to accomplish something really important, and his great disappointment in this lawyer not helping him do that. And then whatever one of you said about, do you like this guy? What's it worth never to see? What is it worth never to see?
I was just gonna say, I think what you said, certainly about acknowledging or recognizing that you're doing that, I would guess that I'm biased in about 85% of communications.
Yeah.
Say, I like that person more than the other one. I think they're more honest. I think they have a better case. I think they're being more reasonable. I mean, that just happens all the time. And catching yourself at it. So one of the things that I do, in addition to all the great suggestions that you made, I recognize who I don't like, and I deliberately do actions that I would do for somebody I like more. I smile at them more. I spend what I think is more time with them, talking to them, and I think in the end it probably helps kind of balance things out.
So compensate.
Yeah.
I have two suggestions. So one is to keep in mind what you're there for. So you're really there to try and help them get their needs met. So really, if where your head's ahead is I don't care whether you just recruited a whole bunch of people. Right now, what we're doing is trying to get your needs met, and I'm going to try and ask you the right questions to help you think it through. As hard as I have to ask those questions, and now I'm doing with the other person, I'm going to do the same thing. I don't think you'll actually have time to be biased, and I don't think any bias will come through, and I think you won't think about it very much, because you'll be focusing on what you're trying to help them get. The other thing is just the general idea that I think we all know that if we just meet somebody and form an initial impression, which everybody does, that you may like someone or dislike someone, but it may be a year later after you know them for a while, your feelings about them change considerably. So in a certain sense, you know that if you have a feeling like that it could be wrong. I mean, you know that it could be wrong, simply because we all have that experience.
Can I just add to that thought? The whole bottom line is that our role is to be inquisitive.
Yeah.
Constantly be inquisitive. We really don't know this person. So continually asking the questions to understand who they are and what their needs are.
Yes, the needs and interests, I think that saves just about the answer to any question about a problem is we're just trying to help people think things through, get their needs and interests satisfied and identified, and that's it. I mean, the rest of it really shouldn't take up any time in our mental process.
I'm gonna ask, oh, good.
So it's kind of one thing to know about mediation and to know about this process. It's another thing to sort of carry the instincts of a mediator and for those to be embedded in you. I wonder if you could talk about any experiences that sort of helped embed those instincts as a mediator in you. And I wonder if those, if that's carried over into other pieces of your life. How does being a mediator impact you and your family or your work?
So 2 questions, Matt.
I don't know. We just.
Well, I have one story, which helped me a little bit in terms of instincts as a mediator. So I was doing a case a long time ago, and so we started out, and as things are going on at the beginning of the mediation, after the crosstalk starts, one of the lawyers turned to me and said, "Michael, why are you talking so much? Can't you see we're solving this for you?" And so that improved my instinct to shut up.
I think that being a parent probably has benefited from and taught me a huge amount, in both directions about mediation. Because I think, you talk about people, who think you don't have any value, who, are gonna disagree with every single thing you say, are gonna tell you consistently that you're stupid and don't know anything. I mean, that's what teenagers are like. And you have to find some way to not take all that personally, to, to say yes, but, in spite of all that, and to make, sort of maintain your sense of humor about it all. And I think being a mediator has made me a much better parent, because it's really taught me to listen in a different kind of way. I think the capacity to be surprised and to enjoy being surprised by what people say and do, I think is one of those mediator instinct things that I think this is a really interesting thing to do. And that's what I think keeps me coming back to do it, is that I'm consistently interested in how it is that people resolve things, how they work things through in their minds. The part that I play in it as the mediator is really fairly minor. It's just sort of opening some doors for them to look at things and think about it in a different kind of way. And I get a huge amount of satisfaction about it when it works out well, and when they walk out of the room feeling like it's been a worthwhile process for them. But I try not to make that all about me. It's really all about them. So it's the listening part, I think.
Matt, the second part of your question, when you say, how has it influenced how you deal with your family? I've heard so many people from CCR say, oh, it makes me, like Rebecca's saying, it makes me a better parent, I'm going to take the contrary position, at least for myself, and say, nope, if I'm in a dispute with a member of my family, it's hell like it was before. And the reason is, not that I haven't learned a lot of skills here, I'm not neutral. I have a hugely vested stake in it, and I have a strong view on what the outcome is. And I'm mad as hell. You're wrong, I'm right. So it shows that even with the skills that we have, every time I'm in a mediation, I look at both parties and I say, there, but for the grace of God, I could be that person. I could have this problem and be fighting with the other party. And it creates a kind of humility, saying that, I'm not better than this person. Thankfully, I don't have this problem. Or maybe even I've had this problem, but I don't have it now. But I could. It could have happened to me, and I'd probably feel very similarly. I'd probably be very angry at the other person across the table as we make. So it hasn't helped me in that sense. But when you said, what was the first part of your question?
Embedding instincts, what happened?
Embedding instincts.
Experiences that help that.
I guess one of the reasons that I really wanted to go into mediation in the first place is I'm really curious about people. And one of the wonderful things about being a mediator is you get to sit in the room and you can ask them anything you want. And I love that. I love that. And I tell people, I ask people in mediations questions I wouldn't even ask my family. I ask them anything. You got to be brave. You ask them what you want. Chances are, if you ask it the right way, you're going to get a really good answer. And so that's a wonderful experience. It's better than TV or the movies.
You couldn't make it up.
Couldn't make it up.
I have like a sort of negative way it's affected me at work. I mean, I think it's positive, but I think some people think it's negative. I'm a supervisor where I work, and people will come and like, well, so-and-so's not doing this, they're not, everybody's on a rampage. And it's like, I want to hear what everybody has to say. It's like I'm not going to jump to the conclusion, at least as much as I can do it. But people get very frustrated with you when you don't get on their bandwagon. It's like, no, there are two of you, or there's three of you, and everybody's seeing it a certain way. So I think it's a good thing, but sometimes people who are, like, on a mission don't always understand if they have one way that they look at it. But I get that, I think it's a good thing. So.
I have an observation, but it's about somebody else, which is Allison Carroll. And the really amazing thing about her, I mean, I'm assuming most of you know her, the really amazing thing about her is she actually lives this. I mean, she really does. Some problem comes up that's just a problem that needs to be solved or dealt with or something like that. And she has these collaborative solutions that just come off the top of her head. It's really amazing.
I have found in my other life, my professional life, that it's also, I'm a better listener in that world. And I'm a consultant in the home care industry, and I work with the State Trade Association, and not my current executive director. I've had a whole slew of them. I've been with them for a long time. She said to me, she always used to say, yeah, there's the meeting, we'll be in this meeting, and then Rebecca clicks into the mediator mode, and and it pulls out, people what they think about things and what's important to them, and because I do, it has turned me into a real question asker, and I don't know that I always was as much of it.
Just having a focus on people's needs and interests at that kind of a deeper level. Like I've had clients that just really wanted to go for the jugular and the other side. And you say, okay, we can certainly do that. I'm your zealous advocate. I will do that if that's what you instruct me. But maybe you'd like to think about these things. And when you start focusing on their needs and interests in the long run, what are they really going to get out of it? Maybe going for the jugular isn't going to be the long-term piece of it.
Anything else from the group?
I would agree with that last statement. I'm a lawyer and I don't like lawyers much, but I think that's one reason I like mediation, is because you're not always arguing just whatever your client wants. You're arguing, you're trying to look at both sides. Anyway, I think you're saying that it makes you a better lawyer. I believe it does. It makes you a better lawyer for your client and against your adversaries, knowing their needs and interests. I'm not very good with the CCR model, but a lot of these concepts are very helpful. And I think being a lawyer is also helping mediate, but that's...
I think that, well, I have a couple of things. One, years ago also, I heard Ed do a session on just a sort of little introductory description of transformative mediation. And I remember at the time, again, I'm a social worker by training, remember, I like to, have it all be nice. I remember at the time thinking, oh no, that would be too, how would you get anywhere with that? And as I have worked in mediation longer, I am much more positively disposed towards it. And I certainly don't do it, but because I have been trained to do it.
It's okay.
But there are.
Cassie and Mac are not listening.
But there are certainly times when, there's ways to reflect the feelings that people are bringing into the room that are not quite as dramatic and non-interventionist as the description that you modeled for us that night of basically just, reflecting the negative comments that people make. But I think it can be hard to be brave enough. It's easy to reflect the positive things that people say to you. It's a lot harder to reflect the negative things that they say, for many of us at any rate. And so I think it's good to remember that sometimes that's as useful as anything, because then people do kind of hear themselves in a different sort of way. So I tend to do that, when they're talking about negative things, I tend to, say things like, oh, so you feel X, you feel, what you're saying is why you really don't like them, tell me more, because it gets to the heart of what they're really feeling like. And it does, then it gives you the hook that you can get around to what the needs and interests are.
Well, I have a question. What do you do when one party is insulting the other party on a regular basis throughout? Rick?
You know, with that question, it depends how you define insulting.
Yeah.
You know, if the insulting is, I think you're lying all the time, I have no problem with them doing it. When the insulting is name calling and the other person can no longer hear what the first person is saying, then you have to find ways to neutralize it. But, you know, if they're saying, this person cheated me, they've been lying to me, they've destroyed my property, I let them do that. You know, I think that's proper venting. It's just, you want to vent to the extent that you need to get something out, but the other party can't get disengaged from the room. So it's a delicate balance. So when the elephant becomes so large in the room because the person's saying, you know, you're the biggest liar in the world, well, then I'm trying to bring it back to, how has his behavior affected you directly? Have you seen that behavior in other contexts? How well do you know him? So you bring it back to the specific and get it away from the name calling where it's truly insulting to a level that you can't have a dialogue. But if it's just general insulting, that's what mediation's all about.
I agree, but I would also say that I'm really watching how the other person's responding. And, you know, which sort of goes to what you're saying. I mean, if this is what they're used to and they're not getting upset. So I'm looking to see if they're becoming frightened, are they, you know, feeling attacked or something, and deal with that. But one of the things I've done too, and Cassie can tell me, I think this is not beyond CCR stuff, but in caucus, what I might say, it's almost what I sort of consider coaching, but not coaching in a particular direction, but asking them, you know, when you're talking like this to that person, is this going to accomplish what you want? Do you think they're more willing or less willing to accommodate what you want if this is the language you're using?
Well
I think of it like with a
Well within the model.
well, so one of the things I think of like with a family case, it's, you know, you hear somebody go, you know, he or she's a rotten parent, and I'd like more time with the children. You know, and it's sort of like, hello, you know, people, you know, I think sometimes people don't know how to negotiate in their own best interest sometimes. So I think that, you know, meeting with them separately and really sort of going on like, you know, these are your needs and interests, how are you gonna best get those from this person? And how are they best gonna hear what you need? So it goes back to the, you know, is this working for you, you know, to do this?
Well, and I think you could even do, you know, flip side with that as well. If you were in his shoes, you know, if you were this person, and you were being talked to the way you're talking to him, how do you think you would respond? You know, and you can do that without judging the way they're talking. You know, it's just a simple question. And sometimes they go, well, not very well. And you say, okay, so what do you want to do with that? Where do you want to take that?
Anything more?
I think if people are making progress, who cares? If they're not making progress, then it's a different issue. Ed, can I get you to comment on this and say what a transformative mediator would do with that?
I may be very far away from that. People at the Institute might not think that I am. Well, there would be two sections of that. One would be to be following what people are saying. I'll get involved in the conversation in terms of, as Rebecca was talking about, I'll be looking for those hot words and the insults. And if somebody says, Rick is a liar, is it Barbara? Barbara says Rick is a liar, I might say right then, Rick is a liar. That's all I'll say. And I'll let that go back and forth for a while. Yeah, I'm watching to see what's happening because I hope they don't have their hands in their pockets. And at some point when it just disintegrates, which it ultimately lots of times does, no progress, then I will say, is it okay? Can I say something? Can I join in here and most times people will say yes or please. And I'll say, I just got a question for you. The way you're talking right now, you know what you want to accomplish. How's this working for you? And then I will say, Barbara, how's it working for you? Is this helping you get to where you want to get to? And I'll get a yes or a no. And I'll say the same thing to the other person or persons, and I'll get a yes or no. Typically, it's no. And then back to a line that I've heard multiple times now, both from Michael and from Rebecca, which is, okay, so what would you like to do about this? Which is a transformative intervention. So that's what I would do. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think in a variation on that theme, which is not transformative, but is Andy Miller's, at least the training director, his approach to it was to, so these two people are screaming and yelling at each other. So what Andy would do is he would lean in like this and very sort of publicly look at his watch like this. And after a short time went by, maybe 30 seconds, a minute, it seems like a long time, but people are screaming at each other, say, excuse me, and essentially what you're talking about was a slightly different take on it. But have you been talking to each other this way before you came here? Oh, yes, yeah, yes. And did that work for you? No. Would you like to try something different?
Well, that's all part of this. Same stuff. And I've done that, not with the watch.
Actually, what I did once, but this is only, I don't know if I should even say this, with people you've really developed rapport with, you can do a lot with people who are very, very angry if they have a little bit of a sense of humor. I mean, if they have a little sense of humor, you can do so much more. But I actually had two people who were just bickering, so I took a piece of paper and I started, that was a good one, that one's good. You know, and they started to laugh because they were, you know, I was just keeping count of the bickering.
But
and then
saying that out loud, saying that out loud, that was a good one.
Yeah.
I mean, so they can hear you keep score.
Sorry, what's yours? Okay.
Can I use that one? Can I use that one?
And then they started to, you couldn't do that with everybody.
Yeah, you don't do that in opening set,
No, you do not do that.
You don't know them well enough.
No,
But
a lot
I
of
really
people
do. If you're comfortable with a little bit of humor and you have assessed the situation and you know that your parties, it is. I think it's unbeatable to be able to, you know, there are certain little moments to introduce it, and it's often, you know, you can do it in a sort of a self-deprecating way, or you can give them an opportunity to be a little self-deprecating, and that often just makes a huge difference. But you know, people are weird. Years ago,
Interesting.
I had this mediation between this guy who had rented the downstairs or the upstairs from this woman for some ungodly number of years, and they had decades of dispute, you know, between them over carpeting and this, that, and the other thing, and he had moved out, and they finally got to the point where they decided what they were going to do with it, and then they had the most pleasant conversation about how, oh yeah, you should come to our, you know, housewarming at our new house, and oh yeah, you know, and it was just like it was like two different people, two different sets of people in the room. You know, once it was resolved, all of that stuff fell away, and they were nice people, and they liked each other. So you just really don't ever know what the real situation is, and sometimes you see it, and sometimes you don't.
So I have one more, as time is winding down. I thought this would be appropriate. So in the short form or adapted models, such as the ones we use in the small claims court, when the allotted time is winding down, what are effective ways to draw the participants' attention to this without sounding like you're exerting pressure on them to settle?
You can't just have like a big bell.
Right. Ding, 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 ding. So what are some thoughts? Michael?
I wrote down some stuff. I haven't done this in years, so I'm not sure I'm at the right ballpark. Well, you see me moving toward a decision. Is that right? And you want me to ask for more time? I've done that. If we run out of time, the CCR permits, do you want to continue to negotiate yourself before seeing the judge? Is there something else you want to do, and what we tell the judge? Given that our time together is running out, is there anything else I can do to help? You can do to help? I gather you're both let the judge decide. It's any of those.
Any thoughts?
You know, I think it's very important from the outset that you tell them how limited your time is, because when you have to ring that bell, they're gonna think you're just cutting them short otherwise. So, you know, you say, as I said, you know, at the outset, we're running out of time here. You know, Michael's suggestions were all great suggestions. How would you wanna use your remaining time? If in 5 minutes remaining, if you don't wanna go back before the judge, is there something that you'd like to say to the other party that might help you get there? You know, given, and then you can recite whatever needs and interest you might have gotten in that short amount of time. It's challenging, it's very challenging. You know, I always feel that in some ways we do it backwards. We take the newer mediators and we throw them into the adapted model. And we take the more experienced mediators and give them longer. And I think that the adapted model, you have to, the more instincts you have at that mediation, the better you are, because you're playing beat the clock, and it's a horrible way of doing it. So instinct is really, really important.
Can I jump in for, when I did the adaptive model, I don't remember the last time either, Michael. I used a countdown timer. And
The cake is ready.
and it speaks, it talks.
Oh,
And at the time it was 40 minutes, I think. Is it 30 now, or is it still?
It varies. Most of the time we have an hour.
Oh, man.
Actually, an hour is hard too, because you can't keep the pressure on them in the same way that I don't think pressure necessarily is bad. And the thing that always amazes me about using the short model in the courts is the abiding belief that so many people have that a judge is going to give them justice.
Yeah.
I mean, that, you know, and that is really very difficult, because I mean, whether you think they will or they won't, you know, if they can't let go, if they don't get engaged enough in the process to let go of that belief, it's a wasted 30 minutes. It really is. It's kind of pointless. So you have to give them a reason to be willing to think that there might be some real advantage to getting it done now rather than out there.
And if the timer prompts them along, then so much.
And every 10 minutes, it's counting down. 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 10 minutes.
People have anxiety attacks.
5 minutes, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ding, ding, ding.
59 seconds. That's what the timer does.
And I think there's a business opportunity here. You should go into the mediator timer business.
Well, I think if anybody sold too many timers these days, we'd be investigated by every anti-terrorist group in the country. But the other side of that is not only at the beginning, but keeping track and indicating how many minutes can you tell your story in 3 minutes? 3 minutes, and everything is truncated and ultimately up to you.
Speaking of that, we got about 1 minute left, so any final comments?
59 seconds.
60 seconds, I think it says. 60
Well, we would love to thank our
Oh, yes.
panelists. It was a very good discussion. Thank you for your time. Thank you all for coming. When the YouTube is available, we'll send out the link, and you have time to have more pizza and talk amongst yourselves. For
Thanks, everybody.
15 minutes.
How
For us, it's not.
Yeah, I kind of figured that there's not much choice, so I got it. Suburbanized area, once an hour.
I know, I go to the opera on Friday night. I watch the
Yeah.
You know what?
No, the
I think
not
so I
the
think
process.
Okay. You have to run. You senior.
Oh, actually, I, and this is, can I help? I just took figure I just come in and figure out, that is my frustration. So I think I am going to go through the way. I'm excited about that. What about you? Okay, great. So now you're to
But I'm an arbitrator.
oh, I see, great.
Yes,
Do you find yourself
Yes.
struggling with that?
Yes.
When you're meeting arbitration?
But
I
they are
can
different
imagine
roles.
that would be challenging.
Yes, that's right. But the skills learned in mediation can be transferred.
To something that.
That's right, so you can handle and remaining neutral. As an arbitrator, you make the decision. But during the whole process, you have to make
So which one do you prefer? Arbitration or mediation? It's not every time. Well, we have to like
the mediation skills can help you in your professional life, family life.
Yeah.
More than arbitration.
Yeah, I found out that December of to a certain time, otherwise how do I? So I thought this would be a great opportunity.
Yes.
Oh, I thought you were Cassie. Great opportunity.
I'm gonna get it.